Welcome to Evolving Ideas. I'm Elaine Smitha. This show is dedicated to something that's different, outside the revolving door. That is the thing that's really common with us every day, is the revolving door. So we're addressing eclectic viewpoints, alternative ideas that perhaps you're not able to receive in any other mode. So I like to think that this show really is dedicated to that. My guest on this segment is Dr. Nick Begich, who I have brought in from Anchorage, Alaska, to present to us information dealing with alternative methodologies of weaponry that will affect the human organism as well as the entire planet. This is called HAARP, H-A-A-R-P. He has written a book called Angels Don't Play This Harp, and this is the only book of its kind on the having been written, and it's just recently on the market. So we're very privileged to have Dr. Nick Begich with us for this segment of Evolving Ideas. So at this point, I'd like to ask you to join me in welcoming Dr. Nick Begich.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
I'm so happy that you were here, because you have done an extraordinary amount of research into this entire project. So I think for our initial viewing of our audience, we need to just bring them up to date. What does HAARP mean?
HAARP stands for the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project, which is a mouthful. So HAARP is the acronym.
Yes, I can see why.
That they've chosen. And Gene Manning and I spent the last year compiling this material and basically researching the subject of HAARP to really find out what the government is up to in Alaska in terms of this transmitter.
So this HAARP was a name that was given to it by the U.S. government?
That's correct.
Primarily military?
Right. It's a joint venture between the United States Navy and the United States Air Force, and it's being coordinated to some degree through the Geophysical Institute, which is part of the University of Alaska Fairbanks.
Uh-huh. So we're getting the university scientific community, so to speak, involved in this?
That's right, and that's the Geophysical Institute is sort of the center for a good deal of global research in geophysics and weather modeling and geophysical modeling.
I see. Now, as I understand it, this is an installation that is installed on the North Slope of Alaska. Is this true?
Actually, it's located near a city named Gakona, Alaska, which is more central to the state at this point. Eventually, the way the military planners are looking at this, eventually it'll be located on the North Slope of Alaska near large gas supplies.
So this is not far from Anchorage, is that correct?
That's right. It's about 250 miles northeast of Anchorage is the location.
Okay. Is that a kind of an isolated area, or is that near some other community?
It's very remote. It's what we refer to as bush country. It's remote from the urban centers. It is a location that previously was supposed to be used for over-the-horizon radar installation by the Air Force, and it was abandoned right after the Cold War and then refitted, so to speak, to the HAARP transmitting facility.
I see. So, well, I think for our viewers, we just kind of need to give them an idea about how this whole thing came about. What is the structure, the difference? This is an array. I kind of, in reading your book, which is well documented, 250 footnotes or something like that.
Right.
That as I could explain it to someone, I said it's like a flashlight beam. If we were to hold a flashlight, we would have a coherent beam at the source of the flashlight, and then it would go out into a broad beam. And so this is the way the first part of the HAARP project, as I understand it, for the last few years has been. Is that correct in
Yes.
that way? But now what this new one is, it goes the opposite way.
Right.
So it would be a broad beam at the base, say on the Earth, beaming up in a coherency up to the ionosphere, which is right by the plasma shield around the Earth that protects us from the rays of the sun.
Right. It's actually protects us from more than that. It's an area of 50 to 620 miles above the Earth's surface, and it's a charged area, electrically active area.
Radio frequencies.
Right, and it basically screens out gamma rays, X-rays, and cosmic radiations that would be damaging to life on the planet. In terms of what this transmitter is, it's actually a radio frequency transmitter of very large size. And in fact, the first stage that they've completed and are testing now in Alaska has an effective radiated power of 1 billion watts. And maybe we can turn to the diagram for a moment.
Yes, you have a diagram over here. Let's get that, because my statement was a little incomplete, because what happens is that this then, when it hits the ionosphere, it beams back down in the opposite of what it was sent in.
Right. What you have, the previous technology, the transmitter at the base, the previous technology operated around the world. When you think of the energy going up, the radio frequency energy,
right.
the higher it goes, the more it spreads.
That's like the flashlight going up.
You bet. And so the density of the energy is very thin at the ionosphere,
right.
whereas at the base where it's transmitted, the density is very
exactly.
Tight. The new transmitting systems are an array, so they can be visualized as posts in the ground with crosses on top, and it's a special antenna design, and they run in groups, clusters, yes. Mm-hmm. And so what you have is a large antenna array, an antenna field, if you will, probably a better way to describe it. Right now it's about 20 acres, and then it basically focuses the energy so that the energy comes up to a point where the energy density at the ionosphere is many, many thousands times more powerful than equivalent transmitters in terms of the energy originating on the ground. So this is a very, very different transmitter, and what it's providing is significantly more power to the area that they're trying to manipulate for these various weapons effects that we'll be talking about later today.
Oh, good. Now, one of the things that we discussed that I needed to have clarification on, which I'm sure that everyone else is also, is that you say that when this beam is up there on the ionospheric plane, up in the plasma shield, that it is a heater. And I think we need to explain what that means, yes, so that that's clear.
Essentially, the way the military refers to these kinds of radio frequency transmitters is they call them ionospheric heaters, mm-hmm. because actually what they're doing is heating up a portion of the ionosphere. They're actually creating, in some instances, an actual plasma layer, like a layer of energy that can be manipulated and moved so they can bounce energy off of it in a very controlled and directed way. One of the other things that happens in certain frequency ranges, when the energy hits the point between the ionosphere and the magnetosphere, which is this sort of energy tail and field that surrounds the Earth, it actually causes energy to amplify, so that once it gets there, once you've delivered this now much more concentrated, compact bundle of energy, if you will, you then get an amplification effect that could increase the energy level by another 1,000 times.
That's a lot.
And then it rains down on the Earth over a very broad area, because as it comes down, it spreads out. And one of the other parts of this transmitter is it's steerable, so they can move it within a reasonably
yeah, that would
arc.
give them a lot of diversity, wouldn't it?
Right.
So what it's doing, it's coming up like this, and then it's hitting the ionosphere, and then it's coming back down.
Right.
So it sort of creates like well, it's like a mirror.
Right, exactly, and that's exactly the best way to visualize it. And depending
and then
on
this can move.
Certainly.
Right.
And depending on how it's just like reflecting light off of a mirror, except they're dealing with a plasma layer of energy, and so they're bouncing radio frequency in the same way, so they can direct it within, a reasonable area band in terms of how it spreads and lays itself back out onto the surface of the Earth. So it's manipulated by the operator who's actually controlling the ionospheric heater on the ground.
Okay. Now, for our viewers, would you please explain what you mean by plasma?
Okay, what we're talking about, I mean, the way to visualize it is more or less live energy. I mean, you're seeing it as an energy layer, so it acts as a mirror in the way the radio frequency hits it.
So these are like the electrons that are...
Right, they're stimulated by the radiation.
And that becomes a plasma shield, is that correct?
Right,
okay.
And there's so many different applications, which we'll talk about as we go through this, that depending on how the operator is manipulating the beam, they can create the varying effects that we'll be talking about.
How do they manipulate that from the ground?
Essentially by controlling the amount of energy going into the array. The way they fire the array in sequence creates a number of effects. That's the one way that they actually get it to focus. By each antenna being operated sort of independently, they can create what they call cyclotron resonance, where they actually...
Okay, what's that?
Where they actually get the energy to more or less, you can picture it as a screw, and so they're literally...
So it's spiraling.
Right, so they're spiraling that energy up and literally screwing it into the ionosphere, and then creating creating this energy blast that then creates the plasma layer. And then from, say, other transmitters, they can bounce signals off of that plasma layer. And there is actually another ionospheric heater located in Alaska called High Pass, which is much smaller. It's about 250 miles away, but it's part of this whole project of HAARP to use these ionospheric heaters in conjunction with one another.
So how long ago did they start this project?
HAARP is relatively new. I mean, it's really the late 80s and 90s where this technology made the advances that brought about the HAARP project. But going back further, ionospheric heaters go back probably a couple of decades at least in terms of looking for stronger and stronger effects. The problem in previous research is they had no way to deliver the kind of energy that they really wanted to get into the ionosphere using ground-based heaters. This new technology changed all of that, and now they have a much more versatile tool from a military weapons standpoint.
Great. Now, there's one thing we didn't do that we need to do, and that is to just have you explain the cyclotron. We forgot to do that. So that our viewers have a better understanding, briefly.
In terms of?
What that definition means.
In terms of cyclotron resonance?
Right.
The whole idea of resonance is basically you're by modulating frequency in a certain way and shaping that frequency in a certain way, you actually end up creating a larger effect. And without getting real technical about that.
So the cyclotronic means that it's expanding?
That you're basically generating a much higher energy density that you're able to control in terms of cyclotron resonance and how it's moving that energy up. So once you get there, what you're essentially doing is delivering more energy to that very, very fine point that's creating that burst, and then you're creating a reaction in the ionosphere that takes advantage of that energy being delivered in that way. So.
Okay. I have a feeling that some of our viewers, are not well acquainted with some of these terms because it gets a little sophisticated, and we need to get it down so that they really understand.
The basic principle in what's here is you're taking radio frequency energy.
Just like our radio functions that we listen to every day.
You bet. And when you look at that, it's spreading that energy out. And what we have here is a new tool that can concentrate the energy, delivers the energy to the ionosphere, which is the important thing to note, is that this energy that's being delivered then is changing the ionosphere in a unique way. Currently, when you look at the ionosphere, you think about the ionosphere, it's a DC current. As soon as you modulate
direct current.
Right, and as soon as you add this pulsed radio frequency, you change it to AC, to alternating current. And what that does is actually change the ionosphere. Instead of then just being a shield that protects us from incoming radiations, it ends up acting as an antenna, so it becomes sort of an extension of the ionospheric heater, the instrument on the ground. So it's actually like part of it, only they're taking part of our natural environment and changing it to be actually part of this mechanism that they've created in Alaska.
So one of the key components of this is the pulse.
Yes.
And that is just like the beat of a drum would be a really good analogy about what that pulse is. And so by regulating this at certain frequencies of, say, sound, different levels of sound, say from low to high, in terms of a resonance variation?
It's pulses per second, and it's referred to hertz or cycles per second, pulses per second, the vibration of the frequency, you might say. But it's being carried on the radio wave, so it's acting like...
it's the carrier wave.
Right, exactly, and it's being pulsed. And it's this particular configuration of pulsing and wave shaping that allows them to get a number of military applications out of the device. And really, to talk about how that happens mechanically probably isn't so relevant. It's what it does, the effect that's matters.
Well, one of the things that we discussed is the range of the hertz from 1 to 30 hertz. Is that
for one specific application, that is the range that they'll be operating in, which correlates to the same predominant brain waves in human beings. So you have a device that's actually going to generate a signal that human beings are going to be sensitive to, that are going to react to.
So the brain is able to pick up the frequencies of up to 30 hertz.
Even in greater, but the range that's biologically active is basically in that 1 to 100 hertz range, or pulses per second, or vibrations per second. And,
which makes the bioorganism very vulnerable to this.
Yes, very much so. And there is some international debate about whether or not what these low frequencies actually create biological changes, but in much research, international research, including Navy research and Air Force research, it's quite clear that not only do they recognize the effect on biological systems, but they intend and have intended to utilize that knowledge in designing new weapon systems, of which we believe HAARP is a major component of.
It would probably be helpful to sort of give our viewers a very brief overview. We're going to get a little bit more into that, but the range of effects that HAARP can be responsible for.
Sure. The straight up military effects, let's talk about those first, because that sort of puts everyone on the same playing field.
Right.
Initially, the military talked about a communications technology, and that was in fact the only thing they said was going to be used initially for Department of Defense
for submarines
purposes.
Right.
For communicating with submarines, that was the primary mission, was to develop this system to utilize it in that way. What they then expanded, at least in the public literature, and things that were more close to the project that we uncovered in our research, it showed they knew this long ago. I mean, this was part of the original planning. One of the other applications currently being funded in the 1996 budget, once that finally passes, is an earth-penetrating tomography application.
Oh, better explain that.
Simple terms, what that is essentially they're going to send a signal up, it's going to bounce back. The energy that's delivered on the Earth will be approximately the same energy level as the Earth naturally creates, except it will be rhythmic or coherent. It'll be pulsed. And then what that allows scientists to do is it'll actually penetrate the Earth several kilometers deep, and it will allow them to locate underground nuclear facilities, underground tunnels. It would allow for differentiation between mineral layers or mineral strata.
That's amazing.
And where this application is being funded, it's under the non-proliferation, counter-proliferation of the defense budget, which is really to look at third world countries and to try and isolate these underground nuclear facilities. The problem...
Spying.
That's it. The problem is the frequency range that John Heckscher, who is the geophysicist with the Air Force out of Haskell Air Force Base, the frequency range is 1 to 30 hertz, which correlates to the frequency range of predominant human brain waves.
Right, and the Earth resonates at about 8
right,
hertz.
Right, and so you have a resonating frequency coming in, and the way the brain normally reacts, if it's shaped correctly, is it will actually start moving in sync with this frequency, so it'll actually entrain.
Yes. So the brain can be entrained.
You bet. It'll entrain brain waves, and then that, of course, as soon as that happens, it also modifies behavior.
Yes.
And this
Jose Delgado.
Right, and this is very important because it's an application that many people don't recognize because they just don't know about it.
They don't think it's possible.
Right.
I mean, we think that we're not vulnerable to anything. Somehow we have this superhuman attitude about, we're impervious to anything, right?
That's it. And, the thing about this particular application that we found that was surprising, when we started looking at the government records on this type of technology, what we found is we found significant research out there in terms of the government documents. In fact, I can turn on this flip chart to just a couple of those documents.
Great, yes.
These two represent the front covers of the two major reports that we first uncovered in looking at this particular technology. And the first one, Low Intensity Conflict in Modern Technology, was actually put together by Maxwell Air Force Base. And in fact, the forward, it's interesting, it was done in June 1996, and the forward was done by Congressman Newt Gingrich.
Oh, really?
Going back a little further, the final report on biotechnology research requirements for the aeronautical systems to the year 2000, this was put together for the Air Force by a private institute in San Antonio, Texas, and this was July of 1982. This document lays out basically sort of the format of how the government intends to develop new weapon systems going into the next century. And one of the areas in that document sort of lays out the timeline for developing radio frequency weapon systems. And it first sets out the need for really getting a clear understanding of what radio frequencies will affect what part of the human body. And then it goes on to the development of full-blown weapon systems to take advantage of that knowledge.
Great. So they can go and beam this down on some population someplace and have everybody turn into zombies if they live through it, right?
They can create a number of effects. In fact, what we found that was published later, this document was published in 1985.
Who was that published
And
by?
this was done by the Electrical
Air
Engineering
Force.
Department, Salt Lake City University, but it was done for the Air Force under a contract. And this radio frequency radiation dosimetry handbook, what it really is talking about, and what this book does, is lay out the effects of radio frequency on various parts of the human body. And what you can see in some of the diagrams is you can see the highlighted sections of these little diagrams of the human body showing where energy within certain frequency ranges actually affects human physiology.
Wow.
So,
the throat.
Right. And it varies, and it depends on which frequencies, which waveforms, and this book basically is the handbook.
Oh.
This is the handbook that the military is using now for developing these new weapons. It is in the public domain. It's a little difficult to find, but it's the kind of...
You have to know where to look for it.
That's right. It's like so many things.
Don't you think that they do really well in hiding all these really top secret things in the public domain somewhere in the library?
They do.
You just have to know where to find them.
A lot of it is, a part of it is the way they develop weapon systems generally. They compartmentalize the work, which means they take the science, the overall project that they want to develop, and they break it into the smallest bite-sized bits, so to speak, and then they spread it across research centers all over the country. So each area, you know, one area works on the effects, one area works on the development of transmitting systems, one area works on the analysis of those transmissions. So everyone's sort of broken out. And
they're all doing it honestly, thinking they're doing something really wonderful, right?
You bet. And the scientists are not villains in this.
No, of course not.
And they all work in their own specialty area and develop the science and really don't see the big picture. It's much the same way when they developed the atom bomb on the Manhattan Project. And then in the end, everyone sort of stands back and is startled, and perhaps they're the kind of projects they may not have even participated in had they known initially what they were
That's right.
What they were doing.
And I think that's the value of your research, is getting this out here at an early enough stage, because this is still in the research stage. This HARP project is not fully developed, which is another aspect we're going to be discussing. But I think that the fact that it is in the research mode, and that these workers, when they become apprised of what their involvement is in this total thing, may change their minds about being involved.
That's right. In this time, it's different than the Manhattan Project.
Yes.
You know, we waited 50 years to find out that the government knew that these detonations in Nevada and a number of the other tests they were doing with nuclear weapons were actually harmful to Americans. And they waited 50 years to tell us the truth, and it was extracted from them. You know, and now we have a new system, a much more sophisticated system being developed that really replaces, in many ways, nuclear technology in terms of effects, and yet we're in it at an early stage. We're early enough in the game where actually we could, in fact, influence the direction of this project more, and perhaps even curtail it for a period of time till we can properly debate and analyze what we're getting into here with this science.
So for those people who might say, my government wouldn't do this, you know, we're going to have to say, wait a minute, yes, they would. Yes, they would.
I think, you know, at this stage, people have recognized that there are many instances where the military-industrial complex uses the American population
as guinea pigs.
As guinea pigs. And it's been well documented in terms of, there was a report that we cite within the book that talks about the CIA's administering LSD to 8,000 servicemen without their consent. That came out of a presidential report prepared by the United States Congress in the aftermath of Watergate. It was sort of the expose on what all the CIA was doing that they shouldn't have been doing.
And that was by inoculation.
Right.
In a hospital.
That's right. And these folks were not told. Likewise, in Alaska, to study the effects of radiation exposures, they used radioactive iodine with native populations, again, injecting it into their system without their consent to test and see what would happen. And these are just a couple of the citations that we reference within the text. It's not unusual. I mean, the nuclear testing in Nevada is another dramatic example of how they knew that the winds would carry the radiation over populated areas, and they knew that would have an effect, yet they did it anyway. And you know, the military's mission in defense is important for the country, and we can't understate that. But by the same token, the development of new weapons that might have a negative effect on the American taxpayer, the American population, rightly should be debated. by that population first. We should know, and we should be able to explore all of that publicly and openly before we engage in this kind of
I think
direction.
so too, because otherwise we're just part of the experiment.
That's right.
Or we are the experiment.
And the mind control issue, you know, we cited the earlier document, the low intensity conflict, modern technology. That particular document had 2 chapters that were relevant. And the one chapter utilizing radio frequency, in fact, pulsed radio frequency, to actually debilitate troops over a very large area. And what they envisioned were sort of track vehicle mounted equipment that would take radio transmitters into an area and basically send the energy into the battlefield to affect the mental function of troops to the point where they would be combat ineffective. And this is important because...
Right, so they walk out and surrender like they did in Iraq.
Right.
Hello.
And there's some speculation that perhaps the United States government did utilize these new weapons in that.
I'm not a bit surprised.
And that's very typical. When the government wants the ultimate test, it's the combat situation. So when the combat situation presents itself, these kinds of weapons are deployed into the battlefield and tested. And I believe strongly that that's very likely what in fact happened in Iraq. The situation too is you don't see it coming. It's not like a bullet or a bomb.
Right.
It's
Can't
invisible. And so the ability to develop safeguards against it from a military standpoint become a little confused. And yet at the same time, you know, this is not science fiction. This is military science, and what we've done is translate that science into plain English so people can get their arms around it and realize that these aren't experimental systems. These are systems that have been developed to the point of deploying, and it's a question of, you know, do we want to see this kind of technology developed? And the military also recognizes that some of this technology runs counter to American values.
I would think so. This is Buck Rogers in the 21st century.
Right. You know, it's funny, in one sense, that science fiction sort of precedes reality in many ways. I mean, right now there's a popular film, it's the newest James Bond, talking about Star Wars weapons, and what we're really talking about here today is a ground-based Star Wars weapon system. And it's not off into the future. Right now they have a transmitter built in Alaska, being tested in Alaska, that produces 1 billion, that's billion with a B, watts of effective radiated power. And they're planning in 1997 to increase that 470% to 4.7 gigawatts.
Billion.
Yeah, 4.7 gigawatts.
Gosh.
And their desired level down the road, we found a document, and it's this one. This is the most unique document. This document shows that the military's desired level is 100 billion watts, 100 gigawatts. And this document, it's interesting in the sense that this was, we were fortunate to have someone on the inside that got it to us. It's Technical Memorandum 195, and it's a compilation of all the notes and overheads and view graphs of planners for the HARP project going back to October of '91. The reason this is a unique document is when you read the forward, the government basically denies it's published. They say this is a non-published document.
One of those, yes.
It represents only private communications. Well, this
for
is
national security.
right, and what you have here, not even under a classified security code, because this way, when you ask for something that's classified, they at least say, sorry, we can't give it to you, it's classified. In this instance, they say, it doesn't even exist.
Now we know how, when they say this on the news, it doesn't exist, but it does. Now we know how that happens.
Looks real to me.
It certainly looks real to me.
613 pages of documents, and it breaks out all of the diagnostic equipment. It links together a number of the sites around the world that the military has previously denied or interconnected in any way. It links together the Poker Flats rocket range in Alaska, which is a very large rocket launching facility that most Americans don't even know they bought. And it's been operating for well over 20 years in Alaska.
Oh my gosh.
It also ties in the new Cray computer for Alaska, which is a $25 million federal expenditure for the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and a portion of that is dedicated specifically to military applications, such as the HARP program. So the military has really sort of two veils, the secrecy veil and then the non-published veil that they hide even further behind.
The public view that they want to just project that they're all, you know, nice and clean and pure.
Right.
Right. Now, one of the things that I want to bring up here is about the weather modification, because that's another aspect to this effectiveness of HARP.
Right, and let's talk about it historically, because this is, again,
Great.
first
Okay.
historically.
Okay.
One of the things that, it's one of these areas that people sort of, their eyes glaze over and they kind of back off when you raise it, but
Well, we've heard a lot of things about weather modification, weather balloons, like with UFOs and stuff like that. And can they manipulate the weather? Oh, no, they can't do that.
Right. Well, if you look back, the United States signed an agreement with over 70 other countries in 1977, almost 20 years ago, where we agreed in that agreement that we would not utilize weather modification in military applications. In other words, in the event of war, we would not utilize our weather modification technologies. So in 1977, almost 20 years ago, what had been developed up until that point was sophisticated enough to cause over 70 countries to sound the alarm and say, hey, we need an international agreement on this, because we're now in a realm that can affect whether or not we grow our own food, whether or not we have self-sufficiency in food production. And so this was addressed in '77, but the research that we found as we went through weather modification technologies goes back into the 1950s, through the 1960s, with a lot of emphasis through the 70s and 80s. And what we have now and what was found then, and as far back as 1969, there was a document that actually starts to unfold and open that whole area of weather modification up.
Amazing. So what is this about lifting the ionospheric level there so they can do some of this stuff?
Okay, there's two ways that they envision this happening.
That's even wild. That's like taking the roof, and raising the roof.
It's and that's exactly what it is. They're going to raise the roof of the world, so to speak.
Oh my gosh.
One of the ways that they envision doing this,
Cocky lucky, the sky is falling.
And it would require a great deal of energy for the first application. Energy far beyond where HAARP is today, but within the range of where it's headed. And what that would do is push this, if you think of the ionosphere as this bubble around the planet.
That's a good description.
And then what the ionospheric heater is doing when it's activated for weather modification is it's pushing part of that bubble up, which is then creating drag around it, so it's moving weather patterns sort of into the vacuum that it creates. And so that changes the way the weather patterns are moving. And that's one way, but to create that effect requires large amounts of energy. Another effect, and one that's more striking, is the idea, when you think of the planet, they've actually discovered in the late 1980s, early 1990s, that surrounding the planet beyond the jet streams are these huge rivers of moisture through the upper atmosphere. And they run in very distinct patterns, which allow for the cloud formation and moisture deposition back onto the planet in the form of rain. But these can be manipulated. If you can create a standing wave,
Can you draw that for us on the board?
Sure.
Do you have a page there where you could do that?
What they would basically be doing in terms of if you just think about the planet itself, and then these rivers of moisture that are just sort of flowing around the planet, and they follow very distinct patterns. What these transmitters could do is send up energy, and it would require two transmitters essentially, and they set up more or less where the two waves interact, a standing wave that acts like acts like a mirror, and it deflects this river of moisture then this way. So then the precipitation or the rainfall is falling over this part of the earth maybe instead of where it should have been over here. So you're denying rainfall to one area.
So you can say, well, you people haven't paid your debt to the World Bank, and so we're going to cut off your water.
Right. I mean, that's the kind of thing that certainly
that's probably their
person
mindset.
Could visualize. But again, what this planet Earth is a big bubble. You can't push against one part of that bubble without affecting the whole. And this is, again, where we get very, very concerned about this kind of science, because how can you model such an intricate system as the entire planet and all of the effects when even today they're still discovering all of these new things about this
marvelous Earth of
ours. And so here we have again a new technology that really is going to be experimented with. That's what this is. This is a giant experiment, only instead of doing it in the lab, they're using the planet itself as the model, as the laboratory, if you will, for creating these effects. In fact, the atmospheric physicists are referring to the ionosphere in Alaska that they're playing with, as a big plasma lab in the sky.
Oh, terrific.
And so, I mean, that whole mindset really negates the idea that, hey, the Earth is an organism that is interactive,
That's
and
living.
it's not a place for just experimentation. It's a place to live and a place to maintain. If there's experimentation that needs to take place, that's going to affect potentially the ionosphere, which is this huge global shield around the planet that will affect everyone. That really belongs in the arena of public debate and discussion.
Yes, absolutely. Is that where it got its name, Skybuster?
That was actually coined by a physicist at Princeton.
Is that right?
Who had been writing in a publication called Physics and Society about the implications of these new ionospheric heaters, and he really referred to them as skybusters. And Dr. Williams, when he was, we cite his work in the book itself, but he really took a dim view of this kind of experimentation, and it's not just an American issue. This is an issue for everyone in the world, because the ionosphere, quite frankly, is not the personal property of any country.
No, it's not personal. Now, what about this environmental system of monitoring migration of birds and animals and fish? I mean, this is going to disrupt all that.
Right, and there's some debate. Now, here's the debate. Some scientists in the biological
impact
sciences...
statement and all that?
Right. In the biological sciences, there's sort of an ongoing dialogue on whether it's gravity and light that affects migration patterns, or how people, or animals, orient.
Mm-hmm.
And another part of that debate says, no, it's not that. What it is they're orienting against these magnetic lines of force which naturally surround the Earth, and that these animals orient against those magnetic lines of force to establish their migration patterns. Mm-hmm. What will happen with HAARP is one of the things that the Geophysical Institute at the University of Fairbanks has done over the years is they've actually launched a couple of hundred barium rockets, and what that does is it makes a visual creates a visual effect in the sky where the magnetic lines of force then can be seen, so they've actually been mapped.
Oh, that's like a lot of people have had barium when they go to the hospital. They know what that is. They look under the screen and they can see their organs there, and the barium shows up the whole thing. So this is kind of the same thing.
Same idea.
Same idea.
Exactly, except now you're mapping magnetic lines of force. Mm-hmm. And part of that mapping is because if you can send the energy, as we showed earlier, focused into that magnetic line of force, then what happens is the cyclotron resonance ends up spinning around that magnetic lines of force, and where the magnetic energy is moving one way, this moves the other way, and it actually shields the Earth. In fact, we can go to a diagram, and I can show you again
you've got one of that.
what that looks
excellent, like. Excellent. This reminds me, while you're doing that, is about Bruce Cathy's work in Australia, where he has charted the grid lines of the Earth in the longitude and latitude, and finds that the communication is working on that grid line, and that at node points where they cross, that's where the most power is. Right. So what you're saying, if I understand you correctly, it's similar to this, following same linear patterns.
Yes, and so what this is an image.
That's like a torus.
And this was an image that Bernard Eastland, who's one of the primary inventors of the patents used on the HAARP program, and this diagram shows in this area you see the cyclotron motion around the magnetic line of force.
Oh yes, it's like okay.
And then as things move, what it creates in effect is a shield around the entire planet of energized an energized ionosphere. So anything passing through this field at a high enough energy density, what happens then is, like, say, an ICBM missile launch. As it rolls through the ionosphere, all of the circuitry burns out.
Oh, terrific.
Okay, so it's one of the weapons applications is for that. But also what can be done is all land, air, and ground-based and sea-based communication systems can be knocked out with this system. And in place of that, then, they can utilize the same weapon for knocking out everyone else's communication, including the television broadcast people are watching today, radio broadcast, telephones, email on the computers, everything. They can shut it down and yet carry their own communications on this system. And so this becomes, from a military perspective, a way to shut down. I mean, what is the first thing that happens when you go into a country that you invade? You go after the communications. You knock the communications out.
Oh, man.
And that's, again, another application that is clear in the patents. Each of the 12 patents surrounding this.
Speaking of that, yes, I want to...
Are actually cited in the text and sort of explained and broken down.
Is this a good place to talk about this patent?
Sure.
Okay, this was in Bernard Eastland's patent application, and which was granted to him. And this is patent 4686605. Claims that it has the following uses: cause the total disruption of communications over a very large portion of the earth, disrupting not only land-based communications, but also airborne communications and sea communications, both surface and subsurface, missile or aircraft destruction, deflection or confusion, weather modification, by altering solar absorption, ozone, nitrogen, etc. Concentrations could be artificially increased. This is astounding.
Yep, and that's right out of the patents. It's not our words, it's Bernard Eastland's words.
That's incredible.
And the patent wasn't granted just immediately. He had to prove to the satisfaction of the patent examiner. In fact, the patent's only a few pages long. The patent file that the patent examiner built on that particular patent is over 1.5 inches thick. And it's sort of the debate between the inventor and the patent office, the dialogue, if you will, back and forth, in order for Bernard to actually prove, in fact, that this technology would work. And he proved it to their satisfaction. The patent was granted, and then coming off of that, 2 additional patents sort of amplifying his original work were also granted to Bernard Eastland, and then other patents were built upon his work by others.
It's amazing. We have a lot of brains functioning out there, don't we?
There's a lot of energy, human energy being placed on the development of this technology.
There really is. Just briefly, because we want to go on, but although it still kind of follows through with what I wanted to do on this show, about Jose Delgado, because many of our viewers may not be aware of who Jose Delgado is, or even B.F. Skinner, who have done a lot of work for the government in brain entrainment and this kind of thing. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. Jose Delgado was originally educated at the University of Madrid in Madrid, Spain, and he received a degree in electrophysiology in the early 1950s, which most people don't even know such a degree exists, but Madrid was the hub of the study of electromagnetic radiations, electricity and other radiations on the human body, and they actually granted a degree as early as 1950 in that area. Jose Delgado then later came to the United States. He worked at Yale University. He was a full professor at Yale. And what he did there, and what he's known for, initially he implanted electrodes in animals and humans in their brains, and then stimulated them with electricity to see what sort of mapping, what parts of the brain affect what behavior.
Oh, right. And you told this wonderful story about the bull.
Oh, that's a good
story. You've
story.
got to tell that story about the bull.
As he advanced, he found out he didn't need to hook wires. He could actually create a radio signal to the electrodes. And what he did, because he was kind of a dramatic sort of guy, he had a bull in a bull ring, and he was in the ring with the bull holding this little radio transmitter, and the bull was agitated so that it would attack him, and it was coming at him in a dead charge, and they filmed this, and he flips the switch to the transmitter, and it stops just a few feet short of him. But just like turning a light switch on and off, he was able to modify the behavior of the bull. But at that point, he had still required implants in the brain, so electrodes running in the brain. What he then found, and this is very startling, but he found that if he shaped the wave in a certain way, the waveform, and generated a certain pulsed frequency, he could create the behavior without any implants. In other words, just taking an animal with nothing unnatural attached to it or around it, and from a distance, using radio frequency as the carrier, he could influence the behavior of the animal to such an extreme. The way he demonstrated it was with monkeys. And he had them in a highly agitated state where they were angry and obviously upset, and then where they were almost asleep. And he was able to take that behavior and flip it on and off, on and off, on and off, like a light switch.
Amazing.
After his work at Yale, and much of that work is published, it's a little difficult to dig out, but you can find it.
Yes, it's there.
He went back to Madrid where he continued to work, and what he found is that these wireless transmissions using radio frequency, again, not connecting any electrodes, not connecting
dealing
anything.
actually with the electromagnetic field around the organism.
Right. What he found is that you could manipulate behavior with as little as an energy level 1/50th, 1/50 of the Earth's naturally occurring energy level.
That's not much.
The only difference is it was controlled in terms of waveform and the rhythmic nature of the hertz, the frequency was controlled. And this is really important because when we go back to that Earth-penetrating tomography application that we spoke about earlier, John Heckscher made very clear that don't worry, this is only going to enter at the same level of energy as the Earth. Well, that's 50 times more energy than you need to create behavior modification in humans. And we're talking here about mood swings. We're talking about someone who's going to go to a state of maybe they're just talking like we are. We're in a beta state in terms of dialogue. That's where we're at. We're at around 13 to 15 hertz more than likely because we're relaxed, we're having a good conversation, we're focused. But they could slow us down and make us sort of sleepy and
Very
unfocused.
lethargic.
Or they could pick us up where they make us agitated and angry. And so this kind of side effect or perhaps directed effect in terms of a weapon system. And what we believe is, as one of the many capabilities of HAARP, although this isn't spoken about loudly in the HAARP documents, it is referred to clearly in other documents, which really leads me to that International Red Cross document that we had found.
Okay, why don't you expand on that?
Well, when we were looking at all of this, the thing we kept missing is, you hear a lot about non-lethal weapons today.
Yes.
And it's in all the papers, it's in all the magazines.
It's like words, but we're just reading words.
Yes.
They don't mean anything.
And at the very end, they talk about sticky foam and things that dissolve tires and all this stuff that people go, well, that's no problem. But at the very end, they always mention microwave or radio frequency weapons, but they never say anything. Well, we found a document from June 1994 that was prepared by the International Red Cross in Geneva, and it was an analysis of the implications of new weapons in international law. So they were analyzing it from that perspective. And a section of that document dealt with radio frequency weapons. And it's the first time that we saw definitively stated that, in fact, there are biological effects attributable to certain frequency ranges, specific ranges, and then from that they kind of layer it. They say biological effects in this range, and then the next thing they lay out is creating bit errors in computers, which is where a signal sort of disrupts the normal flow of information through the computer, so it produces garbage. I mean, its errors are all through it. It's sort of the next layer, a little more energy, a little different frequency range. And then the last range was high enough energy and frequency range to actually melt circuitry. And they lay this out very clearly. We had a radio engineer, because that's not my area, and I kind of stumble around that a little bit, but we had a radio engineer take a look at that and match it against the HAARP contract documents that define what the perimeters are of this transmitter. Not just the perimeters are authorized to use in terms of frequency ranges, but what it can do. And within the capabilities of HAARP are every one of those effects and then more on both ends of the spectrum. So here we finally were able to tie in a very credible document from the International Red Cross back to the HAARP document showing they have the capability. And then the question comes, okay, now that they can do it, would they do it?
Yes.
And I think we all recognize the state of our military-industrial complex and say, if they can, they will. And then the question that pops out is, but it'll affect them. One of the unique build-ins on the HAARP project is it can be run from anywhere on the planet. It's set up, the system when they built it was set up to be run remote. So they can run it from anywhere they want to place an operator. It won't affect them at all.
Oh, that's amazing. Here we all thought that the Red Cross was always out there just going out and helping our wounded soldiers in the field. Well, now you're blowing that cover on this.
Well, they have, from their perspective at least, sort of a global view, and that global view does not always necessarily line up with the view of Americans, but lines up, again, on a global basis. So they're looking at it, okay, now there's these weapons, these new weapons. We need to analyze whether or not we want to see them introduced into the military environment. And this is, again, that kind of gets us back to that American values. I mean, do Americans want to see a weapon developed that affects human thinking? I mean, when you think of who we are foundationally, take the very First Amendment and its speech, press, and religion, which all are built on the foundation of free thinking and free
That's right,
thought.
exactly.
And
Now they want to monkey around with us.
That's right. And this is a very, very important issue, because you're talking about something that strikes at the very building blocks, the cornerstone of who we are and our
Right.
national character. And yet the military recognizes this and are sort of in this dilemma of how do you introduce a new weapon that runs so counter?
Yes.
And they're addressing it.
Well, now, we're thinking, too, now that the environmental impact statement is going to protect us. You're going to blow the cover on that, too, now, right?
Yes, I'm afraid so. The environmental impact statement dealt with the building of the facility, the mechanical structure. In other words, they had to cover some wetlands, so it dealt with the covering of wetlands. It dealt with that it was going to be placed in migration flights of various species of birds, so they dealt with that. They really dealt with all the things around
all the perimeters
of the building, but they didn't deal with the effect of the radio frequency transmission adequately in terms of its effect on the environment. And to our knowledge, no one on the HARP project comes from a biological science background. These are all atmospheric physicists, if you will, planetary mechanics, rather than biologists and people from the biological life sciences that would look at the impact of these kinds of technologies on living organisms, so that could properly be reflected in the environmental impact statement, and it wasn't. It was totally ignored or very, very much inadequately addressed. I mean, the impact statement on this project was actually 2 volumes. Volume 1 was about 18 pages long.
Oh, my.
And that was the government sort of, here's what it's going to do. And then Volume 2, which was about 1.5 inches thick, was really the public comment. And so it was just sort of the transcript of the few public hearings and then letters that had been received. But it really didn't get into the meat of this project. And that's what we attempted to do, and I think we've done successfully, in bringing all this material together and expose it.
Well, you're definitely to be honored for your research and the intensity with which you voraciously went after this, and you and Jean Manning, who is very knowledgeable in her own right and has been researching much of this data for many years. And she's really been a great compliment to you in the coordination of building this whole understanding.
We worked hard together, and we brought different skills and different backgrounds to the project, which really rounded it out. I mean, neither one of us feel we could have written this book without the other's assistance. And we really did. I think we drew out the best in each other as writers. I was first a speaker, so I end up doing a lot of the speaking, which is great. I enjoy it. It gives me a chance to explain complex ideas.
Right. Before we end this segment, I wanted to be sure that we mentioned the other extenuating circumstances of what HARP can be responsible for, and that is creating diseases. It can do that. It can disrupt the cellular configuration and the human organism, which causes a lot of discombobulation. And
let's talk about that just briefly. In terms of when you think of human beings, instead of looking at a human being from the outside in, where you sort of, how are you, and then you look at body parts, and then you look, maybe you'll do some testing and check chemical balances and so forth, and then you kind of stop. But if you really think about human physiology, human beings, where you really should start is at the energy level, which then translates into activity of atoms, which translates into activity of molecules, which then translate into chemical reactions, and then it comes out and reflects itself outward in the body. So what you affect at an energy level, you bet, what you affect at an energy level is profound. And it's this is the newest in the medical fields, people exploring what is being termed now electromedicine. And when you look at that whole concept of electromedicine, if you understand enough about resonant frequencies of specific molecules, what you can in fact do is maybe you have a chemical compound or an element in your body that isn't in a toxic level at all. But if you sort of dial up the right frequency, you can stimulate, you can resonate to that. And what it ends up doing is creating a situation where the body understands that as now a toxic level and a chemical reaction takes place, which then manifests as a disease or a disorder within the physical body. So now you have a weapon system that essentially dial a disease. I mean,
oh gosh,
you know,
that's scary.
I mean, for certain effects, in other words, it's not for everything, but for certain effects, they can in fact create this sort of stimulation to the body that then manifests as illness. And they could, in fact, even cause, say in a battlefield application, if they put a chemical into the battlefield in a very minute amount that would affect, say, the water supply of your enemy, but not at a level that is considered toxic.
Yes.
So it's tested, the water's tested, and they say, okay, this is safe, it has this trace element, but it's too small to be effective.
Yes.
Once it enters the body, using these principles of
It's a
cyclotron
whole other
resonance,
thing.
then you can sort of amp up that little bit of chemical and create this very large effect. So here's
so
your
that
enemy.
becomes the carrier then.
Yes, more or less. So it ends up, you take it in, so now it's in the body.
Right.
You resonate the frequency.
Right.
You increase it and create now a toxic situation where the chemical reactions are occurring. The body's then manifesting the results of those chemical reactions in the form of illness. So you have and again, they don't know where it's coming from. They can't detect the chemical that's normally responsible or the chemical reaction. They see it, but they can't place where it's coming from, and they say, okay, they're suffering from this disease or that disease or this illness or that illness. And that's exactly the kind of weapon system that HARP can be. Among all of these other applications, it's one of the many, many applications that the government could, in fact, utilize with this system. And it doesn't have to be this giant HARP. This same technology can be reduced to more battlefield equipment, things smaller on scale, but creating the same effect.
This is incredible. Well, Dr. Begich, we've come to the end of this first show, and this has certainly been an awesome experience to hear all this information. I know my viewers are going to be intrigued and want to know more about this because it's going to affect their very lives and their families and, oh, gosh, so much. Well, I'm so grateful to you for coming and sharing with us, and we will do another show, so I want my viewers to know that we're going to be doing another one so that we can expand upon this. And so anyway, I'd like to ask you to join me on another segment of Evolving Ideas when we will explore another aspect of this marvelous reality that we call life on this planet. So join me next time. I'm Elaine Smitha.